All right, please be joined this time by my friend and the Creekview OC Bo Page. We got a special one today. Coach Page, thanks for joining me.
Man, always glad to be here and get to talk a little bit different today, probably than some of the normal stuff, but we don't get to see each other quite as much as we used to. So
Yeah,
it's always good to fellowship.
we have to schedule a Zoom time to talk.
That's right.
That's what my life's turned into. But yeah, man, Coach Page coached for me a long time and was a great guy, great asset to Creekview. But today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. You can throw in some football if you want, Bo. But we're going to talk about creating a financial play. We're talking for coaches trying to deal with the finance. I think finances is one of the toughest things for coaches to deal with, Bo, because when you're a coach, especially when you're young, you just want to coach ball, man. And a lot of people are coaching for no money. They don't care about money. They're just coaching ball. Get a little older, you have some kids, you get married or whatever, and you need some money, but you haven't really ever worried about it, or you hadn't ever you're coaching for $1,500 or something. Now you want to start paying attention to this. So I think this is a topic you probably, it's just almost like frowned upon to talk about or something. Like it's like you don't care if you're trying to make money or something. So I'm excited to highlight this, and I'm excited where you're going to go. So I'm going to turn it over to Coach Page and talk to us about creating your financial playbook.
Yeah, so kind of just piggyback off what you said. I mean, as we spent time together in the coach's office, um, it was not a subject that really got brought up very often. Um, and so just kind of out of my, own ignorance and, probably about 5 years ago, I just kind of dove into this stuff, in the podcast world and the world of audiobooks, and just started kind of taking an interest and just realized how little I knew myself. So, excited to get a chance to talk about it a little bit. And it's kind of like you said, it's almost, coaching staffs will spend an hour and a half talking about the JV fullback, or 35 minutes about which angle needs to be taken on a down block, and then you bring up finances and it gets quiet real quick. So but it's an important thing. I want to, just my whole goal is to help other coaches and kind of share what I've learned in the process, and I'm still learning. And it seems like every time I, pick up a new book, I maybe pick up a hint here or there. So excited, to get a chance to talk about it. And yeah, we'll kind of just dive in. Um, so, got some quotes here. I think, athletics and literature and and a lot of times they can go hand in hand. So got a quote I really like here: the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is right now. So that's how I feel about finances. Nothing you can do about what's already happened in the past, but you can act and moving forward. So we broke it down into 4 quarters. So I'm going to kind of just give you a pregame introduction into my background, and then start talking about how to start strong in your finances, financial literacy, investing, retirement, and then just kind of wrap it up at the end. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm an offensive coordinator. But 5 years ago, I just really dove into all this stuff and started taking ownership for my own finances. I think legally, I have to say that I am not a certified financial planner, and this content is shared for informational purposes only. So it does not constitute financial, legal, or investment advice. And you should consult a licensed professional regarding this, your personal financial situation. So do not take anything I say as financial advice, and don't come after me, because I don't have enough money to make it even worth suing. Um, so yeah, building on that, I'll just start by saying I was really blessed and surrounded by men who talked openly about their finances. In my family, We've got two or three guys that own their own company. I have been blessed to have a dad who really understood finances and made me, kind of want to emulate him, and so just really been blessed by that. I would highly encourage anybody um, who's got a 30-minute drive to work, because this is where this all started with me. I listened to Parker Resources podcast, and I listened to Book on Finances. um, so I've got a list of kind of my top 12 books. The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. He's not perfect, but I think, if especially if you're really poor in finances, I think he can get you on the right track. The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley is a great book that kind of teaches you, um, that what people think makes a millionaire is not actually what makes a millionaire. There's a guy out of Atlanta, Wes Moss, who's written several books, but one of them, You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think, gives real world examples of people who live right here in our state. And then just some, I'll just kind of buzz through Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Automatic Millionaire, The Power of Zero, The Richest Man in Babylon. If you're a history guy like myself, and I know Coach Parker's got the history background, it's basically taught it as a financial parable. If you're into that kind of stuff, if you're not, you won't enjoy it. The Millionaire Teacher, Think and Grow Rich. I Will Teach You to Be Rich. The Psychology of Money. I just reread that one actually. That just talks about the emotional side of money, and how people tend to react, with their heart instead of their head. And then lastly, the Little Book of Common Sense Investing by John Bogle. That's 12 books. You read one book a month. I promise you, you'll know a lot more than you know now, because it's just, you don't know until you put the information in front of yourself. Um, so all my goals is just, number one, just get coaches to act. It seems like when you start talking finances, a lot of coaches, just I'm not worried about it. And we have the pension, which we'll talk more about. But I just want people to self-evaluate, and I want people to start planning. I want to encourage people to research and learn. It's all the same advice we're giving to young coaches about the game of football, but we somehow skip over the financial side of it. Because at the end of our career, we obviously, want to settle down and have a nice, comfortable retirement. And then the biggest thing is just help others learn from my mistakes. I've stumbled into a lot of good things accidentally. And then I've made tons of mistakes that I wish I could go back in time. So hopefully this gets, especially to some young coaches, and gets them to act. So one of my favorite, Robert Kiyosaki quotes, is that basically failure inspires winners and it defeats losers. And I think that's true in finance, and it's also, true as far as athletics goes. I mean, there's no perfect way to do this. And so, I think being able to learn from your mistakes in finances is equally as important as it is on the athletic field. All right, so just kind of getting into what I called the first quarter here and starting strong. One of the things I think is just so important, is creating a budget. What I do personally is I'm gonna see if I can change my screen here a little bit so I can see better. Perfect. All right, so to me, functioning without a basic budget is like going on a road game without directions to the stadium. If you don't have a budget, you don't know where you stand, you don't know where your money's going. Um, you just don't have a good plan set in place. So I've kind of I've created this format that works for me. I think everybody can kind of create their own format. But basically, my format is split into two columns, and one is the green column. One is the money that's coming in. It's got my monthly income. It's got my projected Social Security, my projected TRS. It's got all my investment accounts. It's got my savings accounts, my checking accounts, my credit card rewards, everything that's positive. It's got my home value on it. It's got the value of my cars all on one side, and then the red column is all my monthly expenditures, my fixed monthly expenditures like mortgage, my property taxes, my insurance, and then my monthly expenditures, power, gas, water, all that, all my subscriptions, everything. And I, some people like the Dave Ramseys of the world might tell you you have to literally sit down and do this every month. Um, I don't do it every month. I do it about every 6 months. I sit down. It takes about an hour. I put it all in, and I think that it's important. Number one, to know where your money's going, but number two, to see growth, like to see the success you're having, and to see that overall net worth going up. So I do it about every 6 months. I sit down and really look at the numbers. And it is cool because I can, I save each one of them. I can go back when I started that about 5 years ago, and I can see the growth that's happened over 5 years. And it's something that's, the progress is important to see, just like with our kids on the football field. So 65% of Americans in the U.S. right now have no formal written budget whatsoever. I think that number's kind of telling. 65% of Americans have no real like financial plan when it comes to their monthly expenditures, and I think that's put a lot of people in bad situations. The next thing I would tell all coaches is eliminate debt. Debt is the enemy, as far as my opinion. Yeah, there are some ways for financial gurus to harness debt and good debt and things like that. But until you get really good with money, the most important thing is trying to eliminate debt. To me, you know, having debt as you start in the coaching career is basically like starting a game down a score. What I would suggest is what's called the debt avalanche strategy. If you lined up all your debts on the table, the debt that has the highest interest rate, that would be the debt that I would suggest paying off first. And then as that debt gets paid off, you just roll it right into the next debt. I would make only minimum payments on all my other debts. I do think that acceptable debt exists. I think that's things like real estate, moderate transportation, education, emergencies. Like, I think that is acceptable debt. But I think the biggest thing that gets people in trouble is trying to keep up with the Joneses. You need to live within your means. House hacking, for my young coaches out there, that was a strategy that I just kind of stumbled my way into. My second year of teaching, I bought a house. I rented out a room for a majority of the time. And then when I got the opportunity to move, I was in LaGrange. I got the opportunity to move to Pickens. I held on to the house, and it became a rental property. And so it's turned into this great investment for me. And while I was living in it, I had people helping me pay the mortgage every month. So I would definitely suggest that for young coaches, who don't have a family or a wife. I would always buy used. I would pay off my student loans very aggressively. And I would work for discounts. And that is one that I can give Coach Parker a big shout out for. One of the things I was in charge at when I was at Pickens was calling different companies and speaking to people about corporate sponsorships, and that's how we did a lot of our fundraising while I was at Pickens, and it got me used to talking to people. And it's nothing for me to call up a company, for example, like my XM radio. I'll have a date set in my phone, and once a year I call them and I tell them I'm going to cancel, Sirius XM radio, and all of a sudden my bill gets slashed in half. It doesn't always work like that, but it's worth the 10-15 minute phone call to work for that discount. So currently, $36,327 is the average American's non-mortgage debt. And that number was up another 0.4% in 2025. So, based on current trends, I would imagine that it'll only further go up. So that number scares me. If you're in that situation, you can definitely get out of it. But I think you have to have a plan and you have to work aggressively toward getting out of that. One of the things you can do that I think goes a long way toward getting out of holes like that is to start an emergency fund. So to me, living with an emergency fund is comparable to taking the field without a helmet. Everything's fine until you get punched in the face. I think a general rule is 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Just finished a book this morning, a really good read that kind of called that, the runway. So you're building out a runway, and the wider you can build the runway, the safer the landing. So I think the money needs to be accessible within 1 to 2 business days. And to me, the one mistake that I see happening, in this area is this is not meant to be cash under the mattress. Put the money in a high yield savings account, put it in a no penalty CD, a money market account. Let that money earn interest while it's sitting there. It's not able to grow a lot of interest in those accounts, but it is able to grow some and keep up with inflation. So 24%, which is basically 1 in 4 Americans, have absolutely no emergency fund at all. And we all know life happens. Emergencies come up. You have a car accident or a dental emergency or a medical emergency, and all of a sudden now you have this bill that if you don't have an emergency fund, you're scraping together trying to figure out, how do I stay out of debt? I do think it's important for educators to invest in education early on. The earlier, the better. It's basically like installing a new play that guarantees additional success. Once you've got that degree, the pay raise is coming. Ran some of the numbers. I mean, a master's you can still get one under 10,000, and it takes you about 2 years before you have a complete return on investment. For a specialist, it can be a little bit more, about 12,000. Might take you about 3 years for a return on investment. And then the doctorate degree can be under 25,000 with a 5-year return on investment. So with this, don't chase college prestige, just look for quality and look for value. I think Coach Parker could probably agree with me on this. As far as those, where did you get your master's? Where did you get your specialist from? That's really not as important as how good of a teacher you are and what you've done in the classroom, in the hiring process.
Yeah, within reason, Bo, it pays the same. I mean, it's got to be a legitimate place, but
Right.
I can chime in here. If I had any advice I could give somebody financially, and I don't know as much as Bo knows about it, but it would be just do it. Like, especially if you're a young coach, you're like 23 right now, and you're like, man, I just graduated. Just go get your master's. Don't stop. Go. I mean, if you can afford it, go get the doctorate, but don't stop, because once you stop, it's hard to go back, especially if you get involved with married and kids and busy and whatever. But I've never heard anybody say that got their degree, man, I'm glad I waited and did it. Nobody's ever said that. It's never happened, not one time. So plenty of people have said, man, I should have. I'm soon to be a doctor, Bo. Do you know that? I'm
I
assumed to
did
be,
not know
I'm
that.
a soon to be doctor, but
Okay.
I'm also old. So now I did get the other degrees a little bit earlier, but that one I didn't. And you know, it just I've never heard anybody regret getting it earlier. Is what I'm. Whether it's just a master's, whether it's specialist, whether it's doctorate, never heard anybody say, "Man, I sure am pissed I did that when I did it." Like that is one of those. The best time to do it was 5, 10 years ago, and the next best time's right now. So it's going to pay off, especially in education. About the only way you can get money in education, in a lot of ways. And a lot of people will tie your coaching supplement to that, especially the head coach. You can get some days and stuff like that. Now pays for that too. So I would tell anybody that can. I mean, there is money involved, and I'm not saying it's simple, but it is a good move to keep going. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Bo.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I mentioned earlier about what is, what is good debt. I mean, is it better to be able to pay for it with cash? Absolutely. And you definitely can set it up, but I do see a justification for if you need to take out a student loan. Um, this is what I would consider good debt. For me, I got lucky in my master's. I was going to have to take out a loan. And this is going to be funny that I say this is good for me, but my house got broken into while I was on spring break, and all my stuff got robbed, and I got an insurance check. And so, and it was pretty substantial because I'm telling you, they picked it to the bone. And so, yeah, that paid for a good bit of my master's. I wouldn't suggest, having your house broke into, but that's how I got mine paid for. And I had 3 TVs stolen, and I bought one TV and paid for it back until it started, producing dividends for me. Um, but yeah, just kind of to reiterate one more time. I mean, if you taught for 30 years on a bachelor's versus if you taught for 30 years on a specialist, the difference in the amount of money you would make is roughly about $404,000 over the course of that 30-year career. So, almost $500,000 difference just between having a bachelor's and a specialist. And some of that will vary, based on school districts and salary schedules and stuff like that. But yeah, so then the next thing, I would highly encourage is once you've got some money saved up, once you're into the teaching career, I would suggest buying a home. Um, I think when it's done correctly, owning a home can be one of the greatest financial investments in a person's life. You need to try and put 20% down to avoid what's called PMI, private mortgage insurance, because that can definitely, increase the amount you owe each month. You need to choose between a 30-year and a 15-year fixed rate mortgage. If you haven't watched The Big Short, everybody should watch that movie. It's a really good movie. But what got us into the housing crisis in 2008 was something called ARM loans, like adjustable rate mortgages, and people buying homes that they couldn't afford. So definitely want a 30-year or 15-year fixed rate. You want to pay extra toward the principal when possible. And I mentioned earlier, house hack by renting rooms or purchasing maybe a small duplex and renting out the other side. And then refinance if the interest rates get substantially lower. I know we're kind of in a different time now than when I purchased my first house, and then my second house home in Pickens. But if you've got the money saved up to put down a good down payment, you can go ahead and purchase at these interest rates. And if they ever drop down to COVID rates again, by all means, refinance to get the lower rate. So, another number that I thought was pretty substantial is the average homeowner has a net worth 40 times greater than the average renter. I think this just kind of reinforces the idea that owning a home is sort of a forced savings plan into an asset that ultimately appreciates over time. And that's if you buy a good quality home in a neighborhood that's growing. I think it's a great investment. All right, pick the right partner. Um, there might not be a greater financial decision in a person's life than who they choose for a partner. It can positively influence your financial situation through things like, good communications, shared goals, collaborative planning, pooled resources, sharing of the burdens that come with finances. And it can also have huge negative influences. There's financial control, there's stress, there's arguments, financial infidelity, debt buildup, and then it can ultimately lead to divorce, which leads to alimony and child support. So 42% of all divorces in America cite financial issues as one of the main causes for the split. The only thing that's higher than finances is infidelity. So you need to find somebody that you're on the same financial page with, in ultimately picking a partner. And then my favorite, Dave Ramsey quote, people who follow him may have heard it 100 times. What we're trying to do is live like no one else so that later you can live and give like nobody else. So that's great Dave Ramsey quote. Sacrificing early obviously produces some big dividends later on. All right, kind of getting into the second quarter. Of financial literacy. And I'm trying not to get too technical here, but I think there's some things that I've learned that I really, wish I had known earlier on, or some concepts that I had known earlier on. And I'll kind of go through each one, not try to get too technical with it. The first one is the concept of pay yourself first. With the fact that teachers get paid, at the beginning of the month, this one is highly critical. You need to automatically invest in each paycheck. Just basically set it up like a system. The more you can automate your systems, the more you have. It's just like if your alarm set, you're going to wake up at the same time every morning. You need to set aside part of every paycheck for investing. Most experts, I think, would say from 10 to 15% of your take home pay. But if you can't do 10 to 15%, then that's fine. Anything is better than nothing. I think sometimes that can be a big turnoff as people hear, like, oh, I need to give 10 or 15% of my take home for investing. Like, I can't do that. So I'm just not going to invest. Well, if you can't do 10 or 15, do 1%. Anything is better than nothing. So, and also don't be discouraged. If you hit up one of those emergencies or life throws you a curveball, if you have to hit pause, hit pause. But I think the biggest thing is most people live income minus expenses equals savings. So what I bring in plus what goes out, whatever's left over is my savings. But people that are real wealth accumulators live income minus savings equals my expenses. So when I get my monthly check, my savings automatically go out, and what is left becomes my expenses for that month. And then, I'll just add that September paychecks are a great time to increase that. If you had to start at 1% or 3% or 5%, September, you get that pay bump. Go ahead and increase your contribution so that you never really feel the difference between, the August paycheck to the September paycheck. That is something I've done the last couple of years, and it's been really successful. The next concept: let your money work for you. So, we want to buy assets versus liabilities. In the general terms, assets pay returns, liabilities have costs and consequences. These assets are things like homes. It helps you to build additional income streams, limits idle cash. And I think a lot of young coaches, graduate, and the first thing they want to do is go buy a brand new car. Well, the second you drive off the lot, that car depreciates immensely. Um, so, a car, although it gets you to and from work, a car is a liability. A home is an asset. And I think you have to not chase the flashy. I think you have to not compare yourself to others. And if you do that, you can build um, these different income streams and set yourself up for success. The next concept is dollar cost averaging. Once you start investing, right, dollar cost averaging means that you pick a certain amount of time. For us, I think it works really good if that amount of time is every month when you get your paycheck. But you want to invest into the market consistently over that amount of time. If I told all these football coaches, hey, there's a sale at Nike, or there's a sale at Dick's Sporting Goods, and everything is 50% off, every coach listening to the podcast would get in the car and drive to Nike, drive to Dick's, and load up the cart. But when you start talking about investing, the stock market has its ebbs and flows. You start talking about, well, the market's going to go down. For me, I know I'm buying into the market equally every month. If the market goes down, it doesn't affect my emotions. I just got a discount. I got the 50% off at Nike, right, when the market goes down. So I ignore emotions. I stay the course. I put in the same amount. I buy the same high quality index funds, and I move on with my day. And if it goes up and goes down, if it goes up truly and I'm buying in and I'm not close to retirement, I'm getting less for my money. And I think that separating emotions from investing has to be part of it. So, just as an example, 10 days, right? So, if you missed the 10 best days of the market over a 30-year period from 1995 to 2005, the average return was reduced from 8.4% to 2.1%. And I say that to say timing the market is extremely difficult. Don't try to time the market. Don't see a clip on X or TikTok, about some stock that's about to blow up. Just consistently be boring, put your money in the market, and just trust the process. So I think the other thing that's important to know is that the income is not wealth, right? So my definition of wealth is the number of days that I could live at my current lifestyle if I stopped working today before my money ran out, right? True wealth to me is time freedom, right? And then chase savings rates over salary, right? There's not a lot that we can do to impact our salary, right? We talked about education side of it, but what the things we can impact is things like savings rate, like how much I save each month, or instead of maybe buying the 700-800 $1,000 home in what I deem to be the fanciest district, I find a house that's much more reasonable, that's close to work. And don't chase status symbols. Some of the things you see on the internet are they're just fake. You can't see, you're not given privy into people's bank accounts. So you see a guy driving a flashy car, you don't know whether he's behind on payments or if it's paid in full. I think a pretty telling number is 40%. So 40% in a study on American households of incomes over 300,000 showed that roughly 40% live paycheck to paycheck. Right. So, teachers are the second largest group of millionaires in the United States. The only one that's higher is engineers. And I think that that's telling, because I do think that obviously our pension is really good, but I do think that there are a lot of teachers who save appropriately and who do it over the lifetime of their career. And that, combined with your pension, I think leads to such a high number of millionaires. So just some formulas that I think are really cool to look at. And I won't necessarily read off the formulas, but um, go find a compound interest calculator. There's several really good ones on the internet. All you have to do is go Google compound interest calculator and start messing around with savings rates, the number of years, and the value that you put in each month, and start seeing what it takes. What does it take to be a millionaire? If you're a young coach and you go pull up one of those compound interest calculators, start plugging in, 25, 30 years of your coaching career and look at the amount it would take to make you a millionaire. And it's not unreasonable. Time is the biggest key. And so a compound interest calculator will show you that. The next is the rule of 72. I think this is a really easy way to kind of understand how money doubles. So basically, it's 72 divided by the annual interest rate, equals the number of years it takes for your money to double. But in layman terms, so here's an example. It means over a 30-year career, your money will double 3 times if you can just get an interest rate of 7.2%. And it'll double 4 times at an interest rate of 10%. So anyway, kind of just an interesting rule to see how often money can double at different interest rates. Target net worth, again. So this is age times pre-tax income divided by 10 gives you supposed target net worth. So for an example, if you're a 40-year-old coach who makes $100,000 a year, your target net worth is $400,000. And then the 1K a month rule, and this is something that I got reading Wes Moss's book. But essentially, if you have $240,000 saved up and it's gaining at a 5% interest rate, basically that's $12,000 a year, which is $1,000 a month. So the $1,000 a month rule basically tells me that at a 5% interest rate, I need to have $240,000 saved up. So I think that's important to know as we talk about gap years coming up, to kind of get in your head that if I have $240,000 saved up and it is earning at 5%, which you can almost guaranteed do, achieve through a high yield savings account or a money market account, basically you'll generate $1,000 a month without having to, touch the $240,000 you have saved up. So this quote, proper preparation is key to our success. Our acts can be no wiser than our thoughts, and our thinking can be no wiser than our understanding. That's from The Richest Man in Babylon. And basically it's saying, basically our actions can't be any wiser than we are. I've been lucky and I've stumbled into some really good things, but they were just accidents, financially. Hopefully now, as I know more, I'll make better decisions moving forward, or at least that's the general plan. So third quarter, just some investing basics. Opening a retirement account. This is one of the things that I've struggled with in guys that I've fellowship with in the coaching world, is just getting them to take the first step. All right. So number one, ask questions. Ask tons of questions. There's no stupid questions in this. There's too many people in the coaching world in general who walk around and are afraid to say, hey, I don't know. That was one thing that Coach Parker, I thought, did a great job of teaching me as a young coach, is that if I didn't have the answer, I just asked. And even if sometimes I worried it made me look stupid, but I didn't know, so I asked. Don't be afraid to start small. It doesn't take some giant amount of money to get started. Just take action, and just remember, these these companies are in competition for your business. So make them earn it. Like make them answer your questions before you invest with them. And then we're going to talk about different options because I think the options can sometimes be overwhelming. I'll open up the books. I'll tell you guys exactly what I do. It doesn't mean it's the only way, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way. I won't know if it's the right way until I hit retirement time. But I'll open up and I'll talk about kind of my order of operations when it comes to retirement accounts. So the first thing you got to understand is the difference between private versus employer options. All right. So with employer options, obviously, I work in Cherokee County. We use Corebridge. That's my only option. If I want to invest through the option that my employer gives me, I was with Pickens. They were also with Corebridge. It's been several different things. It was Valak and it was something before that. But if you go the employer route, there's not a lot to focus on other than choosing the right type of account and then the best way to distribute your assets within that account. If you want to go the private route, there's numerous highly qualified companies when setting up a retirement account. What you need to compare are account fees. What are my investment options? What are my minimum deposits? How easy can I use this? What's their customer service like? Just I'm listing out 5 solid choices that I have some experience with. I personally use Edward Jones. I have an advisor through Edward Jones, great guy. My whole family uses them, which makes it, very nice because he's familiar with, our whole family situation. Fidelity is another good one. Vanguard, Charles Schwab, and then a company called Betterment. All of those highly qualified, reputable companies. You're not gonna blink and your money's gone the next day. Then the next choice you'll have to make is managed versus self-guided. So the advantages of a managed account is that if it's done correctly, it should be actively balanced. You should have somebody who's got eyes on the market and who's steering you toward, maximizing the potential for a comfortable low tax retirement. The negatives are, while they are fiduciaries and they do, essentially tie their job to giving you the best advice, not all advisors have your best interest in mind. They're not all as smart as they might tell you they are. And ultimately, there are fees involved with using their services. If you use a guided account, the responsibility, or a self-guided account, the responsibility of choosing the investments, it falls on you. But there is a sense of freedom and a sense of personal responsibility that comes with self-guided accounts. Both private and employer accounts have the option to be self-guided. And that's one thing, I'm not sure everybody is aware of, but even through your employer account, you do have the option to distribute your funds in the way that you see fit, versus having somebody who's managed your account do that. Obvious danger of these accounts just comes from inexperience and lack of knowledge, and then emotional reactivity to the ups and downs of the market, which we've talked about already, as something to avoid. I will say that these accounts are easier to manage than most people think. I think it scares people. I wouldn't necessarily suggest somebody who's maybe just getting into investing to do that if you don't feel comfortable with it. But, in the same sense, especially with your employer accounts, there's a limited amount of options and they're supposed to be vetted and they're supposed to all be good options. So there's no crystal ball to tell you what perfect, distribution of assets is going to give you the best return. So there's almost no way to really mess that up. So this one is kind of my pet peeve. the guys on our coaching staff have heard me rant and rave about it quite a good bit. So hopefully, I can shed some light on this for everybody else. So as far as pre-tax investment accounts, um, we have the option as teachers to invest in what's called a 403B and a 457B. The 403B is basically a government's version of a 401k. So if you ever heard somebody in the private sector talk about their 401k, our version is 403B. In a 403B that is a pre-tax account, both your investment and your growth of the investment is going to get taxed when you go to pull it out. Okay. After 59 and a half years old, you're not going to pay a penalty. You're just going to get taxed, which to me is essentially a penalty. But, and then there's also no withdrawal penalties after 55 and a separation of service. So then the other account that you have option for is a 457B, which is just like a 403B, but has less restrictions. Both investment and growth are going to get taxed upon withdrawal. There are no penalties after 59 and a half, which matches all of that matches up with a 403B. The difference is there's no withdrawal penalty after separation of service at any age. And that's the biggest difference. And to me, that's a big plus because, and I'm just going to cite my own example. I had a 457B when I was with Pickens County. When I transferred to Cherokee County, I chose to withdraw that money. I chose to withdraw it. I chose to go ahead and pay the taxes on it. And then I chose to roll it into a Roth IRA, which I had set up with Edward Jones. I paid taxes, but I didn't pay any penalty on that. If I had had a 403B, I would have paid a penalty. And so you're probably, if you're in a county that automatically sets you up when you start employment with a 403B account, I've asked now multiple financial advisors in two different counties why a 403B over a 457, and they have not been able to get a good answer. So my interpretation of this, and this is why I said this is my pet peeve, is that essentially, they want you to have your money invested longer without withdrawing it. That's more advantageous for them through a 403B. It's a better decision to put it in a 457B. And you may not choose to pull it out, but you have the option to without paying a penalty. And that's frustrating because I do think that, at least what I've experienced, is that they don't do a good job of explaining the difference of those two accounts and then making a suggestion, opening it up for you to choose once you have all of the information. All right, so post-tax, right? Post-tax Roth IRAs. So you have what's called a traditional Roth IRA, and it was created in 1998. It has some of the most regulations about how you can get money into it and when you can get money out of it. And to me, the reason there are kind of these rules and regulations is this is the greatest tool for retirement, in my opinion. You can put up to $7,500 per year into a traditional Roth IRA. Once it's in to a Roth IRA, you can put it into stocks, to bonds, to ETFs, to mutual funds. I'll explain what those are if you don't know here in just a minute. But your money, you've already paid state and federal income tax on it. It goes in, and then it grows, and all of your growth is tax free. You'll never pay taxes on it. So, if you put $10,000 in and the 10,000 grows to $100,000 over a period of time, there's $90,000 that you'll never pay income tax on, which is music to my ears because, um, paying taxes just irks me. Um, so, and then on top of that, um, you have access to your contributions at any time in a traditional Roth. So if I put in 10,000 and it grows to 100,000, I can pull out 10,000 without paying a penalty, without paying taxes, because I've already paid taxes on it before I put it in. But there's no penalty. I can do that anytime. So if I got in a pinch, I had to have 10,000 and I invested in 10,000, I can pull it out. So to me, Roth IRA, a traditional Roth IRA, hands down. That's something I wish, I opened my Roth IRA account early on in my coaching career, but I didn't. I just put the bare minimum in each month. And that's something I wish I had been more aggressive with, because I now understand kind of just how awesome of a tax shelter this is. And a great place for financial growth. One thing that started in 2006, and we have the option, and hopefully most of the coaches in Georgia have the option. We now have the option within our employer program to contribute to a 457B or a 403B Roth through Corebridge is who we use. It might be through a different company based on your county. But they were created in 2006. They give you a higher limit, and there's no income restrictions. With a Roth IRA, most teachers don't have to worry about this, but with the Roth IRA, you can technically earn too much money to contribute to it. But within a 457 Roth or a 403B Roth, there is no income limit. You can put 24,500 in per year. So, I'm sure, as I said, 24,500, probably most coaches are laughing, where am I going to have the ability to put that much in? But, let's say hypothetically, you've got a rich uncle, that you didn't know about, and he's giving you this large lump sum, in inheritance. And maybe for the year you want to live off that, and this would give you the ability to put a large chunk of money into this tax sheltered retirement account. It is limited as far as your options to invest by the things that are selected by your employer. And there are some different requirements to access your funds than necessarily the traditional version. So why do I choose Roth? Number one, tax-free growth. I think this is awesome. It gives you greater access to funds. You can pull out your contributions at any time, and then at 59 and a half, just like your 403, B or your 457B, you can pull out your earnings and your investment tax and penalty free, as long as you've had the account open for 5 years. Just to be a little more technical, there is kind of this loophole called the Rule 72T that says you can actually pull the money out before 59 and a half. They just have to be substantially equal periodic payments. So if at age 49 and a half, I decide I want $10,000 a year out of my Roth, I can set that up. Probably good to have a tax accountant set it up for you. The only catch is you have to then pull out $10,000 every year, or else you're substantially penalized. But again, you have access to your contributions, tax and penalty free. This is just if you needed more money, you could set that up. It gives you the greatest investment choice and control. A Roth IRA, you can invest in Coca-Cola, you can invest in, index funds, you can invest in whatever you so choose. You'll have access through it through your Roth IRA. And then, just being some independence from employees. If you change districts, you're not having to, what do I do with my money? Do I roll it over? Where does it go? Obviously, this would follow you no matter where you moved. So just to kind of show the tax advantage of a Roth IRA versus like a 403B that's pre-tax or a 457B that's pre-taxed. If somebody pulled $1 million out of their 401k, their 403B, their 457B in a single year, they'd pay roughly $355,000 in income taxes. Versus if somebody pulled $1 million out of their Roth IRA and they're 59 and a half, they would pay $0 in income taxes. Now, why do people say 401ks are so great? In the private sector is that a lot of companies have what's called a match, a 401k match, and they'll basically give you up to a certain number. They'll match your contribution. We don't have that, and so therefore, we don't really have that ability, or it doesn't. The benefits don't outweigh the benefits of a Roth, in my opinion. So kind of how I pay myself and how I structure my own accounts is my monthly income flows in, right? It takes care of my bills, my emergency fund, obviously gets pulled, pension, medical, all that stuff gets pulled out right in the beginning. Whatever's left, I put into my private Roth IRA, right? And then whatever's left from that, I put into my Roth 457B. And, hope right now I max out my Roth IRA, and I put a very, very small amount into my 457B. But as my pay increases, it will be my Roth 457B that increases moving forward. So again, as much as you can, you want to automate the process. You want just consistent, boring investment. I think that's the biggest key to success. If you can auto draft these funds, that's how I do it through Edward Jones. Is basically I get paid on the first, on the third, boom, my money goes to Edward Jones and it's gone out of my account. And then you also, I've heard the horror story, and so I wouldn't want this to happen to anybody else, but you can open a Roth account, put money into it, and not have it, and just have it sitting in cash, not invested in anything. So make sure that as my money goes into this account every month, that it's purchasing whatever I want it to purchase, whether it be stocks or ETFs or whatever. Don't let your money sit uninvested. That's like the worst thing that could happen. All right, so kind of just talk about a little bit of the funds that you'll see probably in your employer account, or as you start to open your private account. Stocks, they're just a single share of a company. They have high growth potential, but also high volatility. If you go hear guys talk about like Warren Buffett, for example, is rich beyond belief. He'll tell you diversify your money, do all that stuff. But truth of the matter is, he made a majority of his wealth just being invested in Geico early on. So there are some benefits to buying stocks, but I think if you're going to pick individual stocks, you want to pick high quality companies, who have solid potential for growth. And then bond funds, basically they're a fund that invests in many different bonds or loans to the government or private sector. Way more stable than stocks, but they definitely have less earnings. So I would not suggest being heavily invested in bonds unless I was, very close to retirement. Mutual funds are professionally managed pool of money that people whose job it is to invest in different sectors and be experts in different sectors, pull money together and then buy individual stocks that make up the mutual fund. Mutual funds are really good. They're owning a bunch of different parts of really good companies. I think the downside of mutual funds is obviously the hidden fees and the expense ratio that you kind of don't ever see, but that can definitely stunt the growth of mutual funds. ETFs are a essentially they're an exchange traded fund. They're a fund that holds many different investments, many different stocks, but they're kind of set up automated. They're not they take the human error out of it. They have often way lower fees, but they do still have fees like a mutual fund. One thing that you'll see probably in your if you do an employer account is you'll see something called a target date fund, and you'll see target date 2050, target date 2060, target date 2070. And basically these are funds that in theory are invested in riskier things now as far as their what makes up their diversification. And then as you get closer to that target date, they sell off the riskier investments and they buy more bond funds, and it moves toward safer sector. I like the theory of it. It's kind of automated, but I will say the downside is that most of them come with high expense ratios, meaning that you're losing a lot of your profit in fees. And that's kind of like, those fees are kind of like hidden yardage in the punt game, is a good way to describe them. You don't until you really sit down and calculate, oh, yeah, we lost, another 15 yards because we didn't fair catch the football. You kind of don't notice just how much money you're losing in these target date funds. And I'm just going to breeze through this stuff. It's just so if you've heard these terms, but maybe you don't understand what they mean, you have what's called large cap, mid cap, and small cap companies when it comes to stocks. Large caps are your blue chips, your household names, very well established, financially stable companies. They're your Googles, your Metas, your Nvidias. They're kind of the top of the market, Amazons. And then you get to mid cap companies. Again, really established companies, but still growing, not in that large cap sector. Slightly more volatile, but still some really good companies in that mid cap range. And then small cap range are companies with a lot of growth potential, but obviously more risk and more volatile than the larger companies. So if you hear the term growth stock, growth stock are stocks that have been deemed, for the potential for higher sales and higher earnings. They often, as far as the money that they make, they often reinvest their money as opposed to paying dividends. Value stocks are stocks that have been deemed underpriced relative to their earnings or their value. They're often mature companies that do pay dividends. International and foreign stocks, that's kind of speaks for itself, but those are companies that are based outside of the United States. And then fixed income would be things like bonds that we mentioned earlier. And I do want to take a little more time and talk about index funds because I think this is something that's really good. And as far as, I can't speak for every county, but Cherokee County, about maybe a year and a half ago, year and a half ago, added some really good index funds to our options to invest in. they're essentially ETFs that they're just trying to match something. Um, there's multiple types of index funds, but the three we added in Cherokee County are all through Fidelity. One matches the S&P 500. One matches all of the companies traded in the stock market that are in the S&P. And then one is a total international fund, um, which is, which is a wide range of international companies. And so, I said you could self-manage. Just investing in those three indexes alone is a really good strategy, because the expense ratio is so low with those ETFs. You're not losing that hidden yardage, or that extra money gained. Um, so I would, highly suggest looking into the index fund arena. So just real quick, talk about risk tolerance. Um, I do think it's important to know, and this is one thing I think holds some coaches back from jumping into the investment world, is like, you work so hard for your money. Believe me, I know. Coach Parker knows. You work so hard, for this salary. To think of it ever going in the opposite direction is, it's tough to think about. So you have to know that there are risks involved, that there are no such things. In one of my books the other day, I heard a really good quote that basically, things that have never happened before happen all the time. So there could, we had the housing crisis, we had the dot-com bubble, we had COVID, we had all things that we hadn't experienced before. And inevitably, something will happen again that we haven't experienced before. But mitigating the risk through dollar cost averaging and through diversification in your accounts, um, I think that can slow down any risk that you would experience. But ultimately, everybody has to figure out what gets them to sleep at night. If you're up at night, worried about, my account went down $10, then you probably just need to invest in bonds, and you'll make 2% your entire career. For me, what keeps me awake at night is more thinking that I missed out on an opportunity. So for me, it's worth the risk of knowing that it'll go up and down and up and down, but ultimately it's going to trend up and gain over the long term. So one thing I will say, again, kind of another pet peeve for me, is a lot of these companies will tell you to take a risk assessment. So you take the risk assessment, and for me, I don't have kids, so my risk tolerance is very high. So I take the test, and when it spits out, hey, these are the things you should invest in, a lot of times if you say you're, okay with risk, they'll put you very heavily into international stocks. And I don't like that strategy. It doesn't match kind of the trends that I've seen, or where my percentages need to be. So I would just say, don't always trust the risk assessment test to put you in the best um, the best investments for really your strategy. I think it's important. You got to understand the risk, you got to know the options, and then create a strategy you can live with and stick with it. Don't be changing every other week, because you'll never understand whether it's really working or not. Reevaluate every 6 months or once a year, see how your strategy is working, and then kind of roll from there. I will touch on this, limited knowledge, because I don't have children myself. But if you're interested in saving for the kids, there are such things as called 529 plans. Your money grows tax free in a 529 plan. You have some flexible usage for that money, as far as college, vocational school, private school, student loans. It's good because the custodian of the account, own the account, and so you control it and who gets the money and where and all that good stuff. You can change the beneficiary. So if you've got multiple kids, you can change where the money goes. And then the best part of this, and this is a recent change to 529 plans, is kind of the knock on it was, well, what if my kid doesn't go to college or doesn't go to trade school? Now a 529 can be rolled into a Roth IRA um, if the kid ends up not going or not pursuing additional school or training. And that's really cool because you can do that up to $35,000. And so if you sit there and do the math, $35,000 rolled into a Roth IRA that grows at 10% from age 19 to 59 will be worth $1.58 million at the age of 59. So, again, these numbers are tough to reach. I'm not saying everybody can get to $35,000 in a 529 plan for their kid. But if you do, and then that kid doesn't go to college and you put it in a Roth IRA, you've essentially made your kid a millionaire by the time they retire, which is pretty cool to think about. So just another good quote to kind of live by. Wealth is more often the result of a lifestyle of hard work, perseverance, planning, and most of all, self-discipline. So, it's funny in the world of finance, there's so many of these quotes that really roll over perfectly to football and athletics in general. I mean, we talk about hard work, perseverance, planning, and self discipline. Those are things we talk about to our kids all the time. And then, then somebody says, hey, you need to have that in your finances. And it's like, I don't know if I can do that. So, fourth quarter, talk about retirement planning a little bit. Um, I think it's very important when you retire. There's so many teachers that just say, I've got my pension, I'm good. And it's a safety net. It is a wonderful part of retirement. Every teacher that I've worked with that is retired and I've asked them how it's going, they get a big smile on their face and they're like, this is why I became a teacher. This is one of the best parts of teaching is our pension. So, we definitely have that to look forward to. What I'm saying is if you can find other ways to supplement it, you're going to have a very, very comfortable retirement. So this is a fact that gets thrown around a lot. 7 streams of income. The average millionaire has an estimated 7 unique streams of income. I don't think you have to get to that number because we have, that pension. But it is something interesting to think about. I want to talk about TRS for just a minute. If you haven't, even young teachers, go to the TRS website, play around on there. They have periodic benefits estimates. Your pension, if you don't know how it works, 2% times years of service for a max of 40 years times your 2 highest consecutive years salary. But the thing you've got to think about is in your early years of retirement, basically what you have to live on is pension plus investments equals your monthly income. So, your pension is 60% of your highest 2 years. If you work for 30 years, where's the other 40% coming? Have you paid off your house and maybe it's coming from that extra money, money a month, or have you done a good job investing and now your monthly income is back? Because I don't know about everybody, but I don't want to retire poor. I want to retire and continue whatever lifestyle I have at retirement. Then in your later years, you have pension plus Social Security plus investments, equals your monthly income. You do get cost of living increases, but actually, that's actually up to a board to vote on. So in theory, it could go away. But what I have seen is that generally there's a semi-annual cost of living increase that has come from our pension. So I wanted to run just a quick example of um, the TRS retirement simulation here. So I put in, 30 years of service, um, and members' age at retirement is 53. So that's assuming somebody started teaching at 23, and that they were making $100,000 in their highest 2 years. I do think for most of us who get their specialist and work 30 years, you'll be probably over 100,000 by the time you retire. But what you need to know is that once you retire, you're going to have some options to make, and each one of those options has a different monthly amount that you get paid. Option A, which is called the max option, in this simulation, you would get $5,000 a month. Um, and then Plan B, option two. So the Plan Bs, I'll kind of go through what each one is, but basically, you can assume with the Plan B, that you would get 4,700. So, roughly about about $250 less a month. The difference between Plan A is when you pass away, your spouse gets nothing. In Plan B, your spouse is going to get something after you pass away. Plan B, option two, they would get the same exact amount. So I'll kind of go through that on this. I did think it was interesting in some of my research that, according to TRS, 70% of retirees choose the maximum plan of Plan A, which is that you get the highest monthly benefit, and then when you pass away, the payments stop completely. So if you retire, and then you pass away in 3 years, the money is cut out. And then Plan B, you saw Plan B, option two. That's 100% joint and survivor. So that you would get the lifetime benefit, and then if you pass away, your beneficiary would get 100% of your reduced monthly benefit for their lifetime. And I won't go through all the specifics here, but you can also get just a lump sum, is an option. But I don't know which one I'll choose at this point. I think that decision I will make personally closer to time. I can see arguments, and I've heard arguments for people taking all of these options. I think it's just on an individual basis which one works best for you. The next thing is the Social Security website. I would highly recommend, if you haven't been to that website, go and set up an account. It'll take a little while to set it up because you know, you have to basically tell them your, first dog's middle name. You have to give them a blood sample and hair sample. No, it's not that bad, but it will take an hour. It seems like, to get it set up initially, and then it's super easy after that. But basically, with Social Security, you can run an estimate right now to kind of see what you would get at age 62 versus 63, 64, all the way to 70. I do think it's important to note not all school systems pay into Social Security. And if you don't pay into Social Security, your benefits are severely reduced due to something called the windfall elimination provision. And right now, the other thing I think is important to be said is currently Social Security checks are subject to regular income tax up to 85% of your social. So just because, the Social Security estimate says you're going to get X amount, because of our pension, our Social Security is going to get taxed. So that number is going to be lower. Again, that is why it's so important, in my opinion, to have a post-tax Roth IRA, so that money doesn't show up as income. And by not showing up as income, there's less of an impact on your Social Security and its ability to be taxed. So I think that's another prime example of why Roth is such a good investment tool. The one thing I think it's important to note is the gap years. So what I call the gap years, is you can retire at 53 if you're going to retire at 53, and then you're not going to take Social Security until age 62, or possibly even till age 70. You've got an income gap of 9 to 17 years. Your pension is 60% of your income. Like, where's the 40% coming from? What are you doing to make up that gap? I think that is something that needs to be planned for, and it's something that I don't think gets planned for as much as it should. So what are some options? There is this you'll need less in retirement myth. Oh, you're at retirement, like you'll need less money. Well, I mean, I don't want to retire poor. I don't want to retire in financial struggles. I want a comfortable retirement. So I don't buy into the you'll need less in retirement. I'm going to plan like I need the same amount and then be pleasantly surprised if I need less in retirement. Option two, which I think is a fine option, is find a side hustle. It helps you stay active. Having some place that you're supposed to be on regular schedule, like that, will help extend your life. Sometimes when you have that purpose, and you have talents, like don't let them just go to waste in retirement. So I think finding a side hustle is fine, and that can definitely make up that 40% over those gap years. And then option three, use your investment income. So you've got tax and penalty free Roth contribution withdrawals that we talked about earlier. You can use the Rule 72T if you need more than that, where you can draw your Roth interest. And then you've got penalty free ability if you've invested in a 457B to withdraw your money. And that money before 59 and a half will get taxed, but it will get taxed pro rata, which basically means, in an example, if you've got $100,000 in your 457B and 80,000 was contribution and 20,000 was growth, and you go to pull out $10,000, only $2,000 is going to get taxed. That's what that means. So it's still a better deal than a 403B at that point. I think it's so important. Wes Moss does a great job of talking about this, but you have to find your purpose in retirement. I think you don't need to just retire from teaching. You need to retire to something. I think purpose matters more than hitting a retirement number. I think you need to, stay active physically, mentally, and emotionally. Find a way to give back. You've reached this pinnacle in your career. For 30 years, you've been a teacher and a coach. You've either got to redefine your identity, or you've got to find some way to keep teaching and coaching. You may not be the Friday night play caller, but you can still contribute and give back and help youth programs and help in camps and do those things. And I think that's a great way to extend your quality of life in retirement. And so, I mentioned Wes Moss talked about that, and he said, the most important asset you have in retirement is a sense of purpose. And then when you've reached the finish line, enjoy the win. Travel, go to church, volunteer, family time, join a club, eat healthy, exercise, mentor, visit friends, grow a garden, find a hobby. Be thankful you invested. If you hit the end and you've done it the right way, you should have a nice, cushy retirement and hopefully enjoy a bunch of grandkids. So there's definitely some areas that I lack in. If you want, I don't have kids, so I don't have any experience with children's playing other than knowing the basic facts. I don't have a lot of experience with trust. I still don't understand our tax system. I've read several books on taxes. I still don't fully understand it. Or how maybe I should say I don't understand how to not pay the taxes. life insurance, cryptocurrencies, health savings accounts. I don't have a super depth of knowledge when it comes to all those areas. So there are things in the future I'd like to learn more about. Um, and then I'll just kind of sum it up at the end. In the first quarter, we talked about starting strong, creating a budget, eliminating debt, starting an emergency fund, investing in education and a home, and picking the right partner. In the second quarter, you talked about building financial literacy, start paying yourself first, let your money work for you, dollar cost averaging, understanding income versus wealth, and formulating success. In the third quarter, we want you to excel in investing basics, open a retirement account, automate the process, diversify the account, know your risk tolerance, and save for the kids. And then lastly, in the fourth quarter, finish your retirement, build multiple income streams, understand TRS and Social Security, manage the gap years appropriately, find your purpose, and enjoy the win. So that's kind of sums up all four quarters. And I know I've been slightly long-winded in this, but hopefully in all of this, even if you like we say when you go to these clinics, if you could just pick up one or two things that maybe helps you out, then hopefully it's worth listening to my long-windedness. And however I can help, feel free to reach out. I'm on Twitter, Coach Bo page. I enjoy talking about this, and if you got questions, I may not be able to answer them, but maybe I can steer you in the right direction. So
Good, Bo. I appreciate you doing that. We've been doing these podcasts for, hard to believe, but over 6 years now, just past we're in our seventh year of doing these things. And you can only talk about Inside Zone so many times, or Third and Eight. Or you guys might can listen to it more. You might talk, but I can only listen to it so many times. We're gonna get back to that, don't worry.
yeah,
But it's been good to get some different time. Looking for this maybe this whole year to just do some different topics. And then we'll get back to the other ones. There'll be some fresh takes on situations and offense and defense and special teams and character development and staff development, all the stuff you got to talk about. But I think it's important for some of these coaches to take care of themselves. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite. I ain't the best at it myself, but I do know it needs to, I know it's important, and one of parts financially, and I do think teaching in general as an HR guy, you can make a lot of money. You can have a great retirement. It is a selling point that we just accept that we're going to be poor if you're a teacher or something. You don't really have to do that. So I appreciate you taking time to do that. And like I said, I hope people did get one thing out of it. So yeah, good job, man.
yeah. Well, I appreciate it. We all know if you've been in the fire, Friday nights are stressful enough, and if you can have a plan that at least you feel confident in and take some of the stress off you, maybe you can focus on calling, the right third down play on
That's right.
Friday night.
That's right. Hey, next time, let's not have to schedule a Zoom to get to talk to each other.
All right. Sounds like a
Take
plan.
care, man. See you, man.
All right. Appreciate it.